My name is Scott Arbeiter, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of World Relief. And it is our privilege to be a part of this gathering. We're so grateful for the work of the National Immigration Forum, to be part of the Evangelical Immigration Table, and to be with like-minded people as we together grapple with one of the great issues of our day. I want to give you three quick announcements in the order of importance, critically important announcements. The order of these used to change. See if you can tell. Here's the first critical announcement, the Wi-Fi. It is the Spire Connect, and you do not need a password. Do I have that right? Yes, Spire Conference Center, no password needed. So that's the most important thing for most people now. Second to that is the bathrooms. They are just out and a very slight left. Don't turn left, just veer a little bit left and you'll see the restrooms. And then thirdly, for those of you wondering, so when do we get to eat? 7 o'clock. Okay, so I hope you grab something from back there. We will break at 7 o'clock for dinner. Now, before we get started tonight, I wanted to give you just a little bit of an on-ramp onto the Evangelical Immigration Table. Back in about 2011, there were a variety of organizations that were looking at the landscape of immigration and the public perception of immigrant peoples and refugee peoples and said, we really have a confluence of difficult attitudes and perspectives, and our own people in our churches are having trouble navigating this space. So a group of organizations such as the National Association of Evangelicals, the Southern Baptist Convention on Ethics and Religious Liberty, the National Hispanic Christian Leadership, and World Relief began some conversations asking the question, how could we work in a collaborative fashion to do two things? To inform our own congregations about a biblical view about the foreigner, the stranger, the alien. And beyond that, how could we together have an influence on forming good public policy that would be ensconced in good legislation? Out of those conversations, a year later, the Evangelical Immigration Table was formed, and it was launched here in DC with a set of statement of principles of immigration reform. We believe that that statement was prescient, because even though it was written now 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago, we believe it is still highly relevant to the environment that we're in. Since that time, we've had several gatherings in Atlanta, Chicago, and last year in Northern Virginia. But since 2012, a great deal has changed. Things have changed in our political leadership. Things have changed at the local level, the state level. Things have changed even within the posture within our own churches and certainly within the media coverage. But what has not changed is our commitment to helping fellow followers of Jesus grapple with the issues of immigration and vulnerable foreign-born people and ask, how do we understand this first through a biblical lens, then through a lens of humanity, and let our social and our political views fall under the leadership of our biblical and our humanity-formed views. And that has been our intent. We've been working hard at it. You have been part of it. And one of the things that we did that I think has been hugely impactful was just simply to put out the bookmark, I Was a Stranger, and a challenge that goes with it for 40 verses that would help people understand God's heart towards those who are the immigrant and the stranger. I have sat in the offices of Congress people, senators, and I've heard them tell the story how God gripped them and changed their thinking completely because they were dealing with the scriptures. And we're convinced that the Spirit of God uses the Word of God to form the people of God, and so nothing impacts people's long-term perspective and their deep motivations as much as the Holy Spirit burrowing God's heart deep into their heart. Secondly, we released a documentary film, The Stranger, which is, if you haven't seen it, it is compelling to watch. And thirdly, just this year, we released an ebook on thinking biblically about immigrants and immigration. Now, this whole story is very personal to me because prior to being in my role at World Relief, I was for 17 years in the marketplace as a partner in a large consulting and accounting firm. And And then I accepted a call to leave that and go into the ministry. And when I was serving as lead pastor at our church, it was a large church in the Midwest, I was in the middle of an environment that was highly, highly politically charged. It is one of the reddest counties in the country. And yet we knew as a church we had a calling to serve immigrant populations. We had one just 3 miles away from us, and we knew they were not going to come to the church. We needed to go to them. And so we began to pray and to think and to work about how could we serve an immigrant population. And we called World Relief, and we asked Matt Sorens to come. And I asked him, I said, Matt, will you come and speak to our staff and help them understand God's heart towards the immigrant? Answer their questions, disarm the objections, honor their honest concerns. And then we expanded that, and I asked Matt to come to speak to our leadership, then to our missions conference. And in the end, we were able to establish a ministry in the heart of the town of Waukesha, 3 miles away, serving a great number of documented and undocumented immigrants with a whole variety of services. And I did not get one email of complaint from the congregation, and I would get emails if the worship center was at 71.8 degrees. That was the work that was done of laying the foundation of helping people flip the pyramid, and instead of thinking first politically and socially and economically, thinking first biblically, then humanely, and letting that inform their other views. Now, our goal in this session tonight is threefold. The first thing we'd like to do is help us learn together. These issues are so complex, and most of us will find that either we or those who we have in our circle will find that it is too time-consuming to be able to understand all the nuances of the issues, and there's such a cross-current of information, right? So you're asking yourself, what sources do I trust? What do I believe? We have experts in a variety of fields that will be here with you, and not only will we provide access to the experts through these panels, we're going to give you time to interact with them. So this will be a learning environment. Secondly, our goal is that there would be mutual encouragement. I don't know how many of you have found yourself with polarized conversations that have threatened the very fabric of your church, your organization, even your own family. It is running that deep. It's emotionally charged. Our desire is to help everyone in the room say, I have a place to go where I can ask my questions, I can dialogue, I can debate, we can fiercely disagree over things, and then find that our bond in Christ still has us moving forward to a biblical perspective on serving immigrant and refugee populations. And that together we can answer the most critical question of our day is, what does it mean to be faithful to the gospel of Jesus in the moment that he has placed us in? And we're going to learn about that together. We're going to encourage one another in that. And lastly, we hope that we'll challenge you some, because there will be points of view in here with which you will not agree. And we hope that we can find grace for those conversations, we can respect one another, and we can be unified by the scriptures even when we don't have unity in other areas. We can say, this we have in common, and this is more important, and we will unify around that, and then through that we will find ways to work together to discharge our calling in this day. So our hope is that tonight we will inform, and we will inspire, and we will invite, so that together we can each in the communities that we've been called to drive to a deeper discipleship and drive to a deeper love, and we can lead the way. But I will close this with a reminder from the Apostle Paul. The greatest of these is the deeper love. What I've discovered as I interview people for World Relief, and I get the privilege of interviewing so many bright, capable people, what I'll find is often they have a desire to be noble. And I get that. The passion of a young person to do something noble, or perhaps to be heroic, or maybe even a sense of duty. And all those things have their place. But what I'm also and always looking for is, do they have a heart of love? Because the only enduring motivation for the work that we will do is love. The sense of heroism and being noble and even our duty will not propel us nearly so much as the love of Christ in us towards people who have been marginalized and diminished and forgotten, people that are made in the image of God, who we are called to, that propels us, and the love of Christ constrains us. So thank you for already being a part of that and for giving yourself to the effort tonight. I'd like now to introduce Heather Sells and ask Heather to come up, who's going to lead us in a panel on restitution-based immigration reform. And I want to say, for those of you who don't know Heather, haven't seen her, Heather has been a terrific help to all of us through her work at CBN by just helping people understand issues that they otherwise might not get access to. So thank you, Heather, for the way you've been leading in this.
I honestly am more comfortable in front of the camera than I am in front of all of you, so for whatever reason. But I'm really delighted to be here tonight, and I was just thinking, I really think, you know, it's so amazing the way God works the threads of our lives together. 18 years ago, my husband and I were landing in an airport in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, with our 3 children to spend a year working with a church there. And we were so incredibly ministered to by people who loved us at a level that I had not experienced before. And so for me, that is one of the personal threads that I bring to this whole issue. And I think for all of us, it takes us to another level when we can think about our personal connections with the people who are affected by the policies that we're talking about. So I would like to invite our panelists to come up right now and have a seat. I have connected Travis and Gus and Liz, and I will introduce you all. So we are here tonight to talk with you about a new proposal that the Evangelical Immigration Table is putting out, and to begin to unpack that for you and to perhaps give you a new lens, a new way of thinking about it. And let me just introduce our panelists here tonight. We have Travis, and Travis, pronounce your last name for me. Wuso. With the Southern Baptist Convention, the ERLC, as I know it, but the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Thanks for joining us. And then Liz Dawn is here. She is a co-founder of Voices of Christian Dreamers and an immigrant herself. Liz, thanks for joining us. And Gus Reyes is the Chief Operating Officer for the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference. So we want to start out tonight, and the purpose of this is really just to explore, as I was saying, this new reform package. You do all have copies of it, so feel free to look at it if you would like, or just feel free to listen to us talk about it. You can look at it later. But I'm going to go for the 30-second TV summary here, if you will. But really, when I looked at this proposal, what really stood out to me was the word restitution, and that we are taking a fresh look at that. And so, Travis, I wanted to ask you, first of all, when you think about this new reform proposal, when you think about the concept of restitution, and then also think about the concept of amnesty, what are we really saying when we say restitution?
In 30 seconds?
No, you have more time than that. I just put 30 seconds on myself.
Yeah, so I mean, so this idea of restitution is something that the Southern Baptist Convention has been calling for some time. The Southern Baptist Convention has passed 3 resolutions on immigration in 2007, 2011, and then a couple of years ago in 2018. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Southern Baptist Convention, we're around 15.2 million Southern Baptists, 46,000 congregations, obviously, primarily situated in the South. But this idea of restitution has been a part of our call for comprehensive immigration reform from the beginning. In just reading from our 2018 resolution, says we desire to see immigration reform that includes an emphasis on securing our borders and providing a pathway to legal status with appropriate restitutionary measures. And so what's baked into this idea of restitution, I think, for some, particularly those on the left, this is going to make some people uneasy. We just heard Mike's presentation in terms of how people think about this stuff. The idea of restitution is baked into it is the idea that a wrong was committed, that the law was broken, and something needs to be done to account for that. And we can sort of debate and go back and forth what is the seriousness of breaking, overstaying a visa or crossing a border. But, in some cases, I think we have to admit it's more than that. It's in some cases, it's forgery of birth certificates or identity theft in some cases, falsifying documents to employers. And those are wrongs that have been committed. And so I think, for us, I'd say, speaking as a Southern Baptist, as a political conservative, the idea of amnesty, the idea that we would look at those wrongs and just say, no problem. You just saw the polling. It's a big problem. That idea is a problem for a lot of Southern Baptists. For conservatives, they're not willing, our community is not willing to accept that. The question is then, well, what can be done? And I think, for us, we start with the idea that, to deport 11 million people or to ask 11 million people to go home and get at the back of the line is expensive, it's impractical. We also think it's unjust, right? Because at the same time that we have to admit that laws have been broken, in a variety of different ways that I've just gone through, our government has also failed to enforce its own laws. And we think that mitigates against the fact that laws are broken in the first place. But so going back to this idea of restitution, what we have in mind is not go home and get at the back of the line, or we're going to deport all 11 million. That's obviously not going to happen. But the question is what can be done, right? And in order for a person to step out of the shadows, get right with the law, and provide a pathway to citizenship or a pathway to legal status, as we've talked about.
Thanks, Travis. And I assume that all of you have a pretty deep understanding of some of the issues, but we are talking about 11 million people in this country who don't have a legal status, who are living in the shadows of our communities, and what is the answer for this population for their legal status? So Gus Reyes is with the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, and Gus, I think we know these undocumented people are in every community, and we're not always aware of them. I think you perhaps are a little more aware and are hearing more of their stories. What are you hearing from them as to what they are hoping for in the future with their legal status, and what are their thoughts on this issue of restitution?
That's a great question. Thank you. I also serve as the director for the Christian Life Commission for Texas Baptist, and we have about 1,200 Hispanic Baptist churches in Texas. I get to speak to those leaders. The National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference speaks to about 42 leaders who speak to 42,000 Hispanic evangelical churches. And so we get to rub elbows and have some coffee and pan dulce with the people. And amen. And so what I hear from the folks, because I tell them about the wonderful work about the immigration table and what Ali Narani and his team, Matthew Sorensen, what they're doing, and they celebrate that. And I say to them, when I talk to these people, when we go to Congress, what works for you? What would help you? What would you desire? And here's what they say. They say, we would like to go to church on Sundays as a family in one car. Right now, my wife takes some kids, and she goes in one car. I take some kids, and we go in another car. We're not sure that either one of us will be picked up from ICE or something, and so if one of us is picked up, at least there's one parent left to take care of the children. We would like to go to church in one car. And I'm thinking, okay. Secondly, they say, we would like our kids to be able to go to college. Many of our children are stellar in their grades. They have finished community college, they finished, et cetera, and we try to get them through. They just can't receive government funding. We just want them to have an opportunity. And I said, okay, so what are you willing to do for this? They said, fine us. Tell me how much I have to pay. I don't want to live in the shadows. I don't want to live in the dark anymore. I don't want to live scared anymore. I'm a deacon in my church. I'm the pastor of a church. I'm the Sunday school teacher of a church. Fine us. Give us a fine. That's fair, and we'll pay it. And that way we can be here. They even say to me, we don't need to be citizens. We just want to be here legally. We want to have a status. Now, our children who are born here, we think they should be citizens. That's what you have taught us. But they say, we just want to exist and be able to contribute to this country and be recognized for it. Let us know what the fine is. We're glad to pay it. It may take us a while, but we'll pay it.
Wow, all right. 2 cars to church, that's a different Sunday morning. Okay, so Liz, you are so involved with the dreamer community, and dreamers are a part of this reform proposal. Talk about how you see what is being proposed here being good for dreamers, what you are hearing from them.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And if I may, I'll just share a little bit of my background that I think helps provide perspective for where I'm coming from. So I was born in China, and my mom actually came to the U.S. first on a student visa. She finished her grad school and then landed a job and then switched from her student to work visa. And then that's when I came as a dependent, so arrived illegally with proper documentation, but really unexpectedly due to errors on our attorney's part, lost status as a 12-year-old, even though we didn't do anything to break U.S. immigration laws. So I say that because while it was not a choice, right, to have become undocumented, but at the same time, I'm looking back in hindsight, I'm grateful for that experience because it really opened up my eyes to this new world, to this new community, new group of people that I'm now a member of as an undocumented community. But it's interesting, I think about my experience and I think about the way that God works is that I've been both a legal immigrant, a documented immigrant at one time in my life, and then also for a significant period of time of my life, been undocumented. So that perspective, I hold that tension of what it means to have a sensible, a humane, a compassionate way to allow undocumented immigrants like myself and millions of others to come forward, but not at the expense of legal immigrants, right, who have waited in line. So what is that sense of fairness? How do we promote a fair policy? So that's where I come from. I don't pretend to speak for all dreamers, but a vast number of people that I speak with, I interact with many of my friends, you know, their family, their parents, they would do anything, everything to be able to make right with the law, much like what Gus said. I mean, they have even given their lives, right, to cross the border, to forsake family, a sense of belonging, familiarity, to come to a new place, to have that better future for themselves, for their children. They would be willing to, you know, pay a fine. And I think that would be something that would be fair.
Yeah, Travis.
I just want to add two, just put a fine point on two things. I mean, I think when I talk to, your average, Southern Baptist or even, your average pastor about this issue, many of them are surprised to find out that there is no way to get right with the law right now. There is no mechanism, so I mean, that's the starting point. That's why a restitutionary system is so needed, is that the mechanism literally does not exist. The other thing I want to do, just, with Liz being up here, it adds a complexity. Liz is a dreamer. At age 12, Liz broke no law, right? So Liz, this idea of restitution does not apply to the dreamers. The dreamers, we need a separate solution for them. We need that solution 2 years ago. We need that solution 10 years ago. And that's in some ways the least complex morally of these issues that we're talking about. But I wanted to put a fine point on that to make sure that we're clear that we're talking about different categories here.
So yeah, and unpack that a little more. So this proposal is talking about restitution, but it's also talking about doing well by dreamers and providing a solution for them. All right, I want to ask all of you, and we're ending up being a little short on time here, but let's just state the obvious. We're heading into 2020. This is a tumultuous time in our country, especially when it comes to immigration. So talk about this proposal in light of going into 2020. How is this a good thing for this point in history in the United States? And how do we pitch this to the folks back home? Travis, maybe you want to start with that since you have
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would just, again, sort of referring back to the polling that Mike showed. On the right, this is like a number one or number two issue. I mean, that's no surprise. I mean, conservatives, some conservatives are not persuadable, and I'm not saying that we need to try to persuade them. I've had a bunch of those conversations. I imagine if you're here, you've had some of those yourself. We need to focus on people that we can persuade. But there is a slice of conservatives that are really interested in this and are really interested in a solution. I think we need to be thinking about how we can harness that energy for good. I, like probably most of you, are really distressed by a lot of the messaging and messages that are coming out from campaigns and from politicians on the right. And I think, for those of us who occupy that space, it's our obligation to step into those conversations and uphold the God-given human dignity of every person, regardless of where you're from or what your skin color looks like, and try to drive the conversation to a constructive place. Granted, it's 2019, soon to be 2020. I'm not saying that that's going to be easy, but that's the task that's ahead of us. I think we have to take that seriously.
All right, Liz, do you want to add your thoughts on how to pitch this going into 2020?
Sure. So as a dreamer, obviously, my situation, my future is on the line. So I sense a little bit of urgency, and I don't just speak for myself. And particularly with DACA, I'm grateful for DACA. But DACA was really a temporary solution. There are many, because some of you are aware of what's happened in DACA, that the Supreme Court is supposed to rule on it by next spring or summer. And at this point, immigrants, children who are turning 15 years old, would otherwise qualify for DACA relief, cannot, right, because the administration had unrolled the program. So we really need a permanent solution. So as an immigrant, as a dreamer, when I think about immigration policy reform or policy solution, I want something to happen. I don't want us just keep talking about it. It's important to have that discussion, but how do we move forward? And that common sense, bipartisan, middle-of-the-ground approach, in my opinion, is the only way forward that can bring people to the table. And we talked about messaging in the previous session about how important border security, how important it is, that sense of fairness, right? Fairness to all who are involved in this. So this is why I feel strongly and that we do need something that is bipartisan that can bring people to the table.
All right, Gus, I want to ask you, you have been, I know because I've been covering it, working at this issue of immigration reform for so long, and now we're heading into 2020, and I'm wondering, how do you see this new proposal, this new focus on restitution, perhaps paving the way to catch interest?
Well, the solution to me to that question came from immigrants themselves. Because as I talk to people on the far right who are involved in politics, people on the far left involved in politics, it really comes down to their interests are votes and who gets credit. Because who gets credit theoretically gets votes. And so what this one pastor said, of like 60% of his congregation is immigrants, himself is undocumented. He says, brother, I don't need to vote. Take the vote off the table for those of us who are going to pay a fine. We'll pay a fine. We'll never vote, maybe. We'll have a path someday to citizenship or some kind of status, but take the vote off the table so it's not an issue for them to be fighting about. I thought that's a very interesting thought, that he would be interested. You know, I like for my children to vote who are born here, but I don't need to vote. I thought, that's an interesting slice of the picture that I had not thought about. But it seems to me that the vote and credit are the two big issues, and I so much want to echo what Travis said. This restitution idea, somebody died for my sins. Somebody said that Martin Luther King died for my rights and that Jesus died for my wrongs. Well, the truth of the matter is that restitution is not that's a familiar idea to us as believers and in this country. And so I really think that resonates with both sides of the aisle. I do think we have to think about what the voting part means and who gets the credit. Maybe everyone can get credit for moving this thing forward.
All right, thank you. I think we have a few moments to take questions. If there's someone who this has spurred some ideas or there's maybe a little different direction you would like to go in. If not, I've got plenty of questions on my list, being the reporter that I am.
So if you do have a question, or you just raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. Or Heather has great questions.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll maybe ask another question, and if someone thinks of something, we can go there. Wanted to ask, and I don't know which one of you want to take this, but I know one of the thoughts tonight is let's wrap our heads around this idea, and let's take it back to our constituents, the people that we work with, and get more people to sign on. And so I'm just curious from your viewpoints. You work here in D.C. You are trying to persuade folks. What does it mean to have more people signing on, more people lending their support? What kind of difference does that make when you're trying to work with those who are making decisions here in the Capitol? I don't know which one of you want to take that.
Yeah, I mean, you may be wondering what kind of impact it makes when you sign on to a statement or ask somebody to sign on a statement or send it around to your pastor or hound your pastor to, to get him or her to sign on to to a statement like this. And what I can say is it really matters. It makes a big difference. When we're sitting with elected officials, they want to know what their constituents think about this. And so publicly appending your name to something like, to a statement like this helps us here make the case that this is what folks are asking for.
Just kind of piggyback on that, so I've done advocacy work with the Evangelical Immigration Table and Bible Badges in Business, and we've done meetings on Capitol Hill and in local districts, and we will go in and we will actually show the legislators this list of people that have signed on, whether in their district or nationally known leaders, and that makes a difference. And I've had legislators in front of me go through the list like, oh wow, I didn't know that person signed on. Really interesting. So until you've expressed your stance, don't assume your legislators know where you stand. And I think they know that when someone publicly put their name on something, that they're committed to that issue, they're committed to that cause. So it goes a long way.
Yeah, I would just add, and I think some of you have done this before, but at the end of the day, some person on staff is going to say to the chief of staff, here's the calls that came in today. This is what people in your district are saying. If we're not saying something to them, we lose an opportunity. If we're making those phone calls, sending those emails, and when that staff person says, we're still hearing this issue about immigration, this issue about restoration, and about giving people an opportunity. I mean, just stating your convictions to them really makes a difference. There are gaps right now. We go through seasons and maybe they didn't get a call. No one said anything from their district, and so they think, I'm not going to worry about this. But we really have, especially between now and 2020, November, we need to put the heat on, and that's something we can do, and that's something our churches can do.
If I may just add one quick point to that, we talked about kind of the perspective of legislators, what it means to see your names. But if I may just speak from an immigrant perspective, I remember when I was a high schooler or a college student who was struggling with this and with my status before I opened up publicly about it. But when I saw my youth pastor, when I saw my pastor or my leader take a public stance on this issue, it is tremendously empowering for me as an immigrant. So you're not just speaking to your legislators. When you take that stance, you're also speaking to your congregants, your community members that you care enough to put your name out there.
Excellent point. All right, well, I want to thank our panelists so much for just investing your thoughts and your insights here. I hope this has captured your interest. It's such a challenging time to think about immigration reform, and hopefully this has generated some thoughts and a way to move forward into the coming year. So thanks for your time.